Before we start, I just want to make it clear, as a cisgender heterosexual man from the South Side of Chicago, I understand that around conversations of Blackness, my narrative is probably the most elevated and takes up the most amount of space. And so even as we unpack this, I want to make sure that that is not to the erasure of what it truly means to be Black, to be male, something both of which are fluid terms. Blair, my first question to you is there a moment in your life as you were coming up where you first realized that you were under scrutiny, that the way you were seen by the world is maybe not the exact way that you saw yourself?
Yes. The first of that idea being, okay, it's kind of like hard for me to talk about personally, but the first time I found out that I was under scrutiny truly was when my grandmother passed away in 2021. And when my grandmother passed away, it caused a lot of life-changing events to happen. And with my grandmother being my best friend and the person I can talk to about pretty much everything, all of the emotions and all of the emotional maturity that I thought I had, I realized or came to the realization that I did not have that. And a lot of the trying to kind of, in a sense, seek for help, or if not seek for help, just kind of in a way trying to get answers, did not come as a person grieving. Instead, to the world, it came off as a person who was angry. And with that kind of caused me to come to the realization that there are certain things that, as a Black male in particular, as far as the mental health and emotional part, that there will be certain things that just will not be seen as it is. Like a breakdown for me is not a breakdown. A breakdown for me is, in a way, me showing aggression. It's me being violent. It's me being all of these things when that might not be the case at all. Maybe I'm just asking for help. Maybe I'm just trying to seek for somebody to be with me during the hard times. So with that, I kind of came to the realization that I am a Black person under scrutiny, and as a Black male, and I can just say as Black people in general, we have to come to the realization that we have to think twice about our conflicts. We can't act off of first nature. We have to think about it as logical people, even when we can't be logical about the particular situation at hand. So with that being said, that was the first time I kind of came to the realization that I am a Black person under scrutiny, as well as many of my friends.
It's interesting how you track it in your mind, because when I tell people this story, I remember I went to the same elementary school from kindergarten through 8th grade.
Right.
And so I vividly remember being 5 years old. I'm gonna be real with you. I was the cutest thing walking. Curly hair, cheeks was up, smile was about as good as it is now.
Yes, sir.
And I knew it. And so walking through my school as an elementary kid, the world was sort of bright to me. It sort of had that bushy tail. And then there was just this moment in 4th or 5th grade, particularly as, I lost my first grandmother, started experiencing death for the first time. At that moment in our life, you're starting to reel up, wake up to the existential nature of your being. And you're like, oh, wow, I'm a human being. And because you don't have the words to make sense of all of that, as many kids do, you do lash out, or you act out, or you talk back. And I just don't ever remember there being grace for that as a kid. It was like you were cute one day, and then if you talk back the next day, you were immediately disrespectful. Right, you were immediately aggressive. You were immediately out of line, and I feel like a part of my experience as being a Black man is never really having equilibrium. Because the truth is, even now that I'm in my 30s, I don't think I've ever truly dealt with sort of what that shock did to me as a kid when I realized oh, I'm not cute anymore. I'm actually terrifying to people. I'm the kind of person apparently you lock doors to and you just put out and you silence. And I never had anybody to tell I'm terrified. I'm terrified that this is how you see me. You know, when you started to realize this, you know, with your friends, with yourself, did you feel like there were people outside of your family, people maybe in your school community that you could talk to, or is this something you have felt very much sort of trapped inside with?
I would probably say for me personally, I did find people outside of my family that I could talk to. One person being Derek, if you're watching this, my best friend Derek. Shout out to D-Rock. You already know the box. But basically, he was definitely somebody who I would talk to and would listen and would just listen to me as well as I listened to him. And we've had some of the best conversations of my life. And due to that, he personally has become my brother. And I'm an only child. I'm an only child on both sides. I don't have a brother or sister at all. But he has truly become my brother. And just even more people. Of course, I run this program by the name of Links House, which is Links because Butler College Prep's mascot is a lynx. But Links House is basically supposed to showcase Butler College Prep's creatives in hopes of gaining media coverage for them so they can have more so of a opportunity both locally as well as on a global level. But within the collective of people, we've kind of became in a way a fraternity. And with that, sometimes they come to me, which is like a whole bunch of problems and all that stuff. And you know, that we can just talk about it. So the list goes on. So I can definitely say that I found that. But one thing I will say is this. Growing up, my mother taught me how to articulate myself because her thing was she wanted me to come into this world being able to speak up for myself when I saw injustice. She wanted me to be able to articulate my feelings so I would not feel like I'm in a world where my feelings were balled up and I had all this pent up aggression. However, as time progressed, my mother did warn me that some of my vocalizing my problems and all that stuff would not necessarily be seen as, oh, this is a person with a problem, or this is a person having a problem with this, or this is how that person feels, but instead it would be seen as radical, unrational, emotional, and not only would it attack both my blackness, but at the same time it would also attack my masculinity because we've also come from a society that has trained or has given the idea that men should not talk so much. A man should not be a motor mouth. A man should not do that. A man should have a quiet demeanor. So within that, it kind of definitely enlightened me and woke me up in a sense.
Have you felt like throughout your life you have, you know, seen the opportunity to challenge what masculinity has been taught to you or how it's been kind of showcased to you? Because I think about, you know, thinking about having this outlet. You talk about this organization, this group you have. You know, again, we're not that far off in age, but I felt like when I was in your shoes, it was like go write in a journal, or you know, maybe you could put a blog up that nobody would pay attention to. But it feels like you have more outlets to not only recognize that like your blackness, your maleness has been like boxed, but maybe your opportunity to challenge that is more prolific than, you know, the generations prior. Have you felt opportunities to sort of challenge and say, oh, like, why is the expectation that this is how men should be or how they need to be?
Oh, most definitely. You know, like, how could I say this? When it came to the idea of kind of having to have a silent demeanor as a man, or just overall with that whole concept being, it kind of affected me emotionally because a person who was trained not to be silent has to, in a way, become a little more silent for his own protection. And with that, that has created a sense of conflict, a sense of questioning of identity. And with that, it came to me actually questioning the conservative values that I once prided myself in believing. And it actually made me think to myself, oh, okay, I understand why there may be some people who, on the progressive side, may be like, okay, this is not right. Because at first I used to feel that, okay, well, this is how it is what it is. Yes. But at the same time, I also came to the realization of everything within this world, right? Everything within this world at one point in time was subjective. Everything in this world at one point in time was opinionated, and it became a fact simply because of people seeing repetition of this particular thing going on. So within that, if we were not consistently repeating the same cycle of what masculinity is, then what we consider a fact, what we deem as a fact, would not be a fact, but instead of an opinion. Because a fact becomes a fact once generalization and repetition comes into play. You dig what I'm saying? So with that being said, it did make me question it. Well, with you, since again we're not that far, right? But with you, my question would be, do you feel that in this time, in this day and age, that what your representation of masculinity was your representation of what it meant to be masculine extremely changed, or do you think that there's still some similarities at hand?
I mean, I continue to be in a process of unlearning, right? I come from a family that very much told you that like men had to be a certain way, had to move a certain way, how to provide a certain way, while simultaneously growing up in a matriarch, which was interesting because all of these women in my family were telling me like men have to be this, and I was just like, but you run everything. I'm very confused. Like all my grandmothers ran all of my grandfathers, and then it was just like, you got to be the head of your household. I'm like, you run all of this. I'm very confused.
Right.
And so to what you said, it's like, you know, so without that sort of hardcore repetition, right? My life is a juxtaposition of hypocrisy. I watch people teach me one thing while live in a completely another way, and yet, while knowing that my grandmother's was this, I never challenged my grandfather's like identity. No one ever made them feel less than who they were, and so I feel like I got plenty of examples of men with, you know, very cold hearts and men with very big hearts. I got men who didn't speak a lot when I was a kid, and men who showed me it was okay to cry as a kid. And so I feel like throughout my life, I've constantly understood that this idea of masculinity is a box. It is not to say that I have not participated in that same constriction of my own identity, right? As I've come to understand, you know, my own sexuality, if I've come to understand my own place in this world, my own position to think, and who I like to be, right? I'm very openly, you know, a person who likes to cry, right? I enjoy the cathartic nature of doing it, and yet I'm still unlearning years and years of sort of beating it down inside of my body and almost feeling guilty for possessing it. And so I've been blessed to have these examples that let me feel comfortable in who I am and how I choose to move through this world, while simultaneously having some really clear examples of sort of this stereotypical Marlboro-like man. And all I could think throughout my life was he or they seemed to be the most unhappiest men in my life, because as much as masculinity and toxic masculinity is a detriment to all of the people who have to come in contact with it, it is a disease for he who inhabits it, in the same way that whiteness is a sort of a scourge on those who have to deal with the consequences. But for white people, I don't think they realize you are in a box as well. And I don't think men realize, with all the privileges that comes with their own toxicity, that like you yourself are sort of trapped inside of something.
Right. And one thing I would like to add on, like one thing I want to be parenthetical with you on, is the idea that masculinity is a plethora of things. It's not just one thing, and I think that that's the huge misconception. And the reason why I feel that a lot of men are unhappy is because a lot of times, a lot of us try to fit that ideology of masculinity, being a macho man, or being the man who shows little to no emotion, or being the man who, through his emotion, just has to keep on going, no breaks, none of that, just keep on going, because life is hard, the world's going to beat you down, but you have to keep on going, you have to keep on staying in order to get where you're going. And although there's some truth to that, at the same time, it's like a person who bottles up everything mentally. When you bottle up everything mentally, eventually you can't run from yourself.
Yeah.
Because you can run from every battle, but the internal battles is something that you cannot go from. Whether you believe in biblical ideas, even when you go, you're still yourself. So within that idea, it's like if you have all this going on within you, instead of constantly trying to keep on going, why don't you, as a person, instead of just trying to keep on going, actually address that, and then you can thrive towards the things that you want to go to in a more comfortable setting. Because for me personally, I don't think that life has to be as uncomfortable as we have given the perspective of it to be. And within that idea, I just feel that there's much simpler ways and much enlightening ways to go towards where we would like to go.
No, I agree. Before I segue into my next question, I was thinking about this with someone the other day, and it comes up so much. If we could see the world through kids' eyes, and obviously it's very complex.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you explain to a child these sort of complex ideas of like gender and identity, and they just be like, "Cool, that makes sense."
Right.
That's how it is. And so I do think it is complicated, very much because, like, as you said, with this backlog of repetition, we sort of talked our way out of compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of talked our way out of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back to this title, right? We've come to understand through some of these questions, like what it feels for each of us to be Black and male, what it means to move through that. But you're a young person who has come to journalism as a means of unpacking this narrative,
Mm-hmm.
of making clear to onlookers that it is more dynamic, more complex, more joyous. Why do you think journalism is I don't know if sufficient is the right word, but an effective medium at challenging what are often very stereotypical and limiting narratives?
To me, in my eyes, journalism is like movies. It's like a screenplay. You're telling a story. You're telling the stories of people that have not been heard. Journalism is meant to voice the voiceless. So, like, this is how I feel. I feel that journalism is one of the things that can solve or come up with solutions to problems that have not been solved. And within that idea, the reason why I got into journalism is because the more stories you hear, the more we see that life and just overall the world is just not the same thing. I think that as Black people, we have constantly had to deal with the same narrative over and over again. And although as time has progressed and we have become more represented in the narrative, in the media, at the same time, a lot of times I feel that it's more so for diversity checks than actual change and progression. So within that, this is where I chime in, I don't feel that journalism, the system of journalism and the representation of journalism will necessarily change through trying to work through a traditional journalist POV. But instead, I think that in order for us to truly change the narrative, we must actually start institutions or join independent institutions who are culturally being consistently made and actually not necessarily having a narrative yet. Because systems are systems for a reason. The reason why the systems are never broken. The reason why they work that way is because it's a system. So within that idea, I feel that in order to have the complete narrative change that we would like, join these independent places, join these institutions, or create your own institution where you can have a clean slate. And within the clean slate, create the narrative. And as time progresses, popularity comes in place, as social media is coming through, making it easier to access for fame to happen. And within that, the narrative that you're trying to push towards the youth will grab it and eat it up. Because at the end of the day, the youth will click on something that they think is cool. And if you come in with a clean narrative that's not only progressive but also think it's cool, then the youth will definitely not only eat it up but will also deem it as one of their core virtues. And that's where I come in.
I appreciate your idealism. I truly hope as you kind of move through these spaces, you're able to kind of hold on to that optimism. How do you, just in sort of the way you live, the way you interact, the way you express that optimism, how do you think that in itself creates new narratives or offers challenges?
Well, first off, I live by the motto that I made personally for myself that was called Always Be an Optimist, which was inspired by my mother, who is a poet and also has all my life basically told me to reach for the stars. Like, I'm also in filmmaking, and the biggest person that I look up to is Spike Lee, who's also, fun fact, Spike Lee has replied 2 times to my comments before. I still have that screenshot. And Spike, if you watching this one day, hey, dude, we gonna need to talk, for real. Sincerely from Blair, Chi-Town's on Yard Gloves. But anyway, one thing I will say is that my mother always ingrained in me the idea of reaching for the stars. She always said that everything was possible. And I remember when she said to me that as you go into filmmaking, or as you go into the arts in general, there's going to be a lot of doubters. There's going to be a lot of people who are not going to necessarily agree with you. But then she also said to me this one thing that I carried with me and has never left me. She said, look around you. Everything that you see has been created by someone. How come yours can't do that? And with that, first of all, let's dissect that for a minute.
He was like, that was a bar.
That was a bar.
He's like old school big boy shit. Just
That was a right. Just marinate on that for a minute.
If we got any questions, I think we can.
Yeah, please.
There we go. Does anyone have any questions?
Comment.
Or comment.
Or comments?
No.
No?
No, I'll comment.
You like to comment? Okay,
What's
hold on.
that comment? You should comment. You're in media. You should comment.
Look at her just giving you secrets away.
As you're trying to just say.
Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
Let what you're doing of it. Now we're going to talk because we're in our 60s, so we're going to talk from a different point of male masculinity, black.
Yes.
We're shaped by fathers that were part of the black migration. So when you all are a combination of a whole lot, there is no one narrative. Black men will always evolve. We have black fathers that were under Jim Crow. My father was actually on a rope and escaped with his life, lynch rope. And her dad.
He was born in 1901.
My dad was born in 1914. Like the freedoms you have now, they could have never could they have expressed it. They were under what you know of as Emmett Till, walk with your head down. However you felt had to be suppressed. The interpretation of a black man at that era was he's not a man, first of all. And he wasn't even a full person. So we're shaped a little different, but I look at the involvement of you all and all you young people, and I'm very happy. I'm very happy, I'm very proud, because there is no one narrative for black males. There never will be. Because we're everything possible. You guys are everything possible. And you're shaped from your ancestors that you never knew. The ones that finding your roots, the roots you haven't found yet. You're a product of all of it. So your mom told you right. She told you to stay positive, stay aggressive, stay yourself, stay out of the box. You be all you want to be.
I appreciate that.
But let me say something. I want to say something.
Oh, now you want to say something.
But now, it was interesting when you said you saw your grandmothers running everything. Because I did too. All the women ran everything.
I didn't have grandmother.
But
I never
the
knew.
men sat back. But when it came to the streets, and when the president came on TV, you sit down and listen. When it came time to vote, you vote. Then they were the leaders. But at home, you're right. The mothers and the grandmothers ran everything.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to the outside world, it was the man's.
And they were respected.
And at that time, it was truly a man's world. I mean, the men had all the jobs that paid money. When I came up, we could only get certain jobs. A nurse, a school teacher, a nanny, a babysitter. But engineering and forensics, we didn't know nothing about that. That wasn't even our choice.
Closed doors.
We couldn't go there. But now I look at the girl that can take engineering and architect. I'm like,
STEM
wow.
programs.
I mean, if I had been young and thought and had these things to do, I can't even think about it because we couldn't even imagine it.
But we're proud of those who carry on. That's the whole thing.
So I can understand why you were confused about a man being strong if the women ran everything. I can see that, but I've never heard that till tonight, so that's something I gotta think about. Okay?
I understand. And even as I watched this in my household, my grandmothers went out of their way to make me understand and help me to understand, even as my grandfathers did not open up what they lived under, which is even as I, challenge and unlearn some of the behaviors that were sort of passed down, I don't do it without empathy, right? Or my goal is not to recreate the scrutiny for my fathers, my grandfathers, and my great-grandfathers, even as I challenge what they grew up in, even as I sort of challenge what they chose to pass down. I do understand that they were not born free and innocent and make the choice to put themselves in a box. They came to learn and had to make choices based on their circumstances. And so I want to be clear that the work that both of us are doing to sort of maybe chart a more evolved and more fluid understanding of masculinity, I think comes with the understanding, knowing that we are free and privileged to do as such.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I like your heart again, by the way.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's up, Blair? I don't know. I've been pondering a lot as I was listening to y'all speak, and a lot of what I was thinking about is how I live my life, challenging the quote unquote what it is to be a black man, and how you present yourself, how you express yourself in all those ways. And I wanted to ask you all, because I know I've come to my realization as becoming an adult, probably when I was getting into college, these hegemonic masculinity ideals were not right. And when it comes to people on the street that I'm talking to, people that I don't actually have love for, for lack of a better term, I'm more quiet to try to change their minds if they're still a part of that. But for people in my family, I try my best to you don't know that what y'all was learning back then was wrong. It's not this isn't right. So I wonder how y'all think about it And are you trying to help people unlearn stuff, or do you find difficulty in when you're doing it, or like what do you think about collective unlearning of these ideals?
What? Well, for me personally, I am trying to create a sense of unlearning, because again, although I was raised in a very progressive household, at the same time, within going into the world, I did find myself facing a lot of things that were totally different from my home, which matched up to more so of the conservative, toxic masculinity values that a lot of us, and including myself, has had to unlearn. But one thing that I do as far as kind of contributing to that idea is, again, with my group, Link's House. And since we roll as a fraternity, although we do have a girl there too. But basically, a lot of times when there is a problem, right, and the dudes come in feeling down and all that stuff, one of our mottos is basically cutting everything that we're doing and usually saying like, hey, yo, what's wrong? Talk to me. We're your brothers. We got you. Tell us what's up. We check up on each other. Or in case if everybody needs to reset, what I personally do that helps me is stop what I'm doing, close my eyes, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, stretch out and everything. And shoot, even if I have a jacket on, maybe take it off because energy is transferring, and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times, for me personally, how I show how to unlearn toxic masculinity or some of these masculine traits that have more so harmed us as males instead of progress is basically through giving more so of an inclusive space for males where they can basically speak about their problems, and maybe we don't have the solution to the problem, but at the same time, when you speak about certain things, there's certain things that even without a certain answer, you still learn certain things. And once you learn it, you can take the stages to progression. And if it's with your brothers, then so be it.
I choose sort of one of two schools of thought. One is a professor. I try to do a lot of modeling behavior. And so one is I'm very self-critical myself. We use a lot of gender language naturally. We use a lot of ableist language, a lot of problematic language, just sort of in our natural lexicon. So I'd like to challenge myself to sort of remove that. So if I'm hosting something, if you hear me on the air, you are often not hearing these things recreated. But then in my own life, and like amongst my own family, my own circle, I'm the antagonist. I'm the person at Thanksgiving that if somebody says something that's a little wild, everybody in the family looks at me and is like, well, Kobe about to say something to you.
Facts.
You know? and I feel comfortable in playing that role. Even in my friends, and I hope this is not a reductive example, but I think about when Moonlight came out, right? And, you know, this was a movie, like me and my friends as large groups watch all good movies together. And this was a movie that I wasn't going to allow to sort of escape us because of people's discomfort. And so even as we watched the movie, you know, I sort of sat in the back and, you know, dudes at certain parts were like, I'm like, hey, cut that shit out, right? Scrutinize why you feel the way you feel, what makes you uncomfortable. You know, why can you view certain relationships on screen, even queer relationships, but not other ones? And ask yourself, why have you come to feel this way, even if it feels sort of hypocritical to how you think about it, right? Because you have a lot of friends who are like, well, I know that, you know, these are just human beings, but you also have a biological programming. And so, you know, I try my best, even through that example, to, again, lead with empathy, lead with understanding, but to antagonize and to make people become aware, because it is in that silence that we can easily sort of justify, sweep under the rug, and sort of maybe hold our tongue. But sometimes it's in that antagonist space that you realize if you follow the logic maybe 2 steps back, it don't make no damn sense. And you actually only feel the way you feel because you don't know better, and that's okay. because we all don't know better about something. But if we're all willing to be criticized, to be critical, then we can grow. And it's embarrassing, and it sucks, and it doesn't feel good to be wrong or to feel that you are implicated in the, sort of degradation of someone else's identity. But you are, and it's not your fault you're implicated in it, right? As well as systems are because they are systems, and something is invested in you feeling the way you feel. I'd argue it's the labor movement that wants to keep us seeing each other as individuals, because if we realize we are not, and the collective power we have will overthrow bourgeoisie, that will lead us into a chaos that this world maybe does not have the geopolitical strength for. So that's my thought on it.
Facts. Yeah.
Any additional questions or comments?
Thinking about it.
Okay. I mean, they can talk, right? They know how to do that. Could you guys talk about like the moment when you realized that, I know you asked about the moment you realized you were under scrutiny, but the moment where you felt an emotion that was against the values that you guys grew up on, especially around like toxic masculinity. So whenever you felt something that was against the grain of what you saw from your fathers, your grandfathers, people that raised you, and it clicked for you like, oh crap, I'm not with the program in terms of like, how they raised me. And maybe that's something that, might not be as easy to talk about with those folks.
Yeah, I was there. Although my family personally has tried to improvise the sense of inclusivity and just overall the idea that you can come and you can talk to me. A lot of times when you talk to people of the Gen X generation or baby boomers and all that stuff, it kind of makes you feel very soft. Like, it makes you feel almost as if you don't struggle at all. And within that idea of not feeling like you're struggling at all, then you come with the idea of, okay, I am very privileged. And then once you come with the idea of you're very privileged, then you start to question your emotion of, well, if I'm very privileged and if I'm well fortunate, then how come I still feel this way? And once you start thinking about that, that's when you start to question your identity. You start to question, why is your mindset your mindset? And is this genuinely how you feel as a person? Or was this just something ingrained in you by those who, such as your mother, your grandmother, your uncle, your father, your aunties, etc., etc., the list goes on. Are these truly and genuinely in your heart, or did you just take these people's words as literature? And within that, it kind of causes you to, in a way, really have to dig deep within yourself. And once you start to dig deep within yourself, that's when you come to the realization that there are a lot of ugly sides of you that you don't like, at all. And once you realize that you don't like it, then you have to also come to the realization that, hey, I have to look at this person in the mirror every single day. Do I like myself? And then once you actually answer that, that's when reality shifts. So, yeah, most definitely.
I remember coming home from college during like those holidays, and one of the epiphanies I had away at college is like, bro, you kind of sexist. Bro, you kind of homophobic. You're not the worst version of that, right? You don't hope for anyone's rights to be restricted. You don't want anyone beaten. You don't want anyone's sort of liberties restricted. You think people should be able to live how they want to live and love. Right? You got all these talking points, but you realize that you are that you've probably deeply have deeply ingrained views. And so going to college and having these things challenged by mentors who were both women of color, Black women, Latinx women, having queer men and women in your life for the first time, and having these people again approach you with empathy, approach you with sort of like taking your logic for what it is and walking it back those 2 steps and realizing with you, hey, you don't know what the hell you're talking about, right? You have some very rape apologist sort of lingo in here. You have some very, right, I'm from that generation where it wasn't pause. People would just outwardly say things like, no homo, right? And thinking as like a child that like, oh, this is just like colloquial language. But having people stand in front of you and tell you like, no, this hurts, this is challenging. And so I remember coming home and feeling sort of enlightened to this and realizing, oh man, I've just done all of this work, sort of root these things out, and coming back into an environment where I remember talking to a grandfather, he said something to me that just made me go, dude, you're really messed up. And he did not like that. And it was in that moment where I realized it is not enough to be the most violent offender, right, of something, or the most violent perpetrator. I think there are levels to this. There's a spectrum to misunderstanding. There's a spectrum to hate and to malice. And for a long time, I thought it was, as a child, you don't recognize that oftentimes when you're trying to correct, that you don't really do that. You just sort of point at something worse than you, take solace in the fact that you're not that, and you sort of keep moving. And it was in that moment where I realized I was responsible for these thoughts and these feelings, that someone's identity was on the other side of these feelings. Someone else's livelihood and life was on the other side of this. And when I came back, I didn't do that thing where you come back from college and just tell everybody, you don't know shit. I took English 102, right? I didn't do that, right? I sat in it for some years and sort of listened to this and paid attention to it. And by the time I had really come back from 6 or so years away, I had sort of rooted a lot of these things out, and I either had to cut people off or had to become that person that for a few Thanksgivings was deeply challenging to everyone in the room, to where they realized you had to change your views or you had to be silent about them. And if you have to be silent about your views, I don't know, maybe either you don't live in, I'm not saying this is a democracy, but you don't live in a place that allows it, or it's because you know. It's because you know, right? That you're on the fringe.
Okay. Well, we got time for one more question, so.
I just want to say that I'm proud of my son. Having the guts to do this.
Appreciate it.
It also gives us a conversation in the car.
Yeah.
So,
I love this because honestly, I was just like, man, I wonder who my man is in the back. Back in Chuck. I wonder who he is.
I'm David. I'm David. I'm Blair's dad.
Yeah, that's my dad.
Yeah. That's it. I would say being Black and under scrutiny, gosh, how could I just really be honest? I think we're under scrutiny with our own kind to the greatest extent. Meaning Black with Black. That's loaded. That's really loaded. And I think our goal is to be expressive in the most, I guess, honest way. Like there's a diversity here, and I think the goal is to find that honesty, and just be. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, if you go to, unfortunately in Chicago, it's a little bit challenged because the South Side is black, the North Side is predominantly white, the East Side is predominantly Mexican, you know, and you find just blotches but if you go to a place such as New York where it's more they're kind of a big soup bowl, you know what I'm saying, then maybe the scrutiny would be less scrutinizing, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? But Chicago's culture is, man, you know, it's changing slowly, but it could be more progressive, I think. Yeah. Thank you. Good night.
You guys want to touch on that?
Oh yeah. All right. Hey there. Okay. Well. Okay. Cool. So basically, one thing that if you all get to know me, is that I'm a history buff. I love history. Been loving history forever. Been loving history since I was 6 years old. Attended Kwame Nkrumah Academy, which was a school dedicated to the Pan-African teachings of Kwame Nkrumah, who was also a Garveyite, et cetera, the list goes on. But if you are wondering why the city is segregated, I suggest you search on Google 1919 and it will explain everything for you. Because in 1919, there was this fight, and this fight originally started on a beach where there was a black line and a white line, however, it was invisible. And then once one of the black men crossed that line, it caused a bunch of white men to throw rocks at him, which eventually one of those rocks turned out to hit his head and eventually dying, causing a particular fight between blacks and white men, which eventually started off as a war and a brawl throughout the streets that caused the overall deaths of hundreds of people. So if you want to know why Chicago is the way it is, search on Google 1919. It's a slept history. It's a very valuable history lesson. And history is important because humans are repetitive creatures. In order for us to not repeat the past, we shall learn these things so we will not be ignorant to them. So search 1919, people. You know what I mean? All right, cool.
I just want to thank Blair. I want to thank Olivia. I want to thank everybody at Public Narrative for organizing this. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And so I'll kind of pass it back over to O.
Thanks again to Jacoby and to Blair. You guys did such an awesome job.